Hi, this is the second chapter of our ArchViz training online. Today we'll talk about lighting exterior in V-Ray. You can download the scene for free, we included a link in the description of this video. First of all, we will merge geometry with our empty scene in 3ds Max. After importing, let's open Render Setup by pressing F10. First we'll change the output size and assign V-Ray Renderer. It's done. Now we can go to the V-Ray tab. We'll open Expert Displacement Settings and choose Full Light Evaluation. After enabling this option, each shaded point is calculated by all lights in the scene. On the other hand, Adaptive Light option is using Light Gauge to determine which light sources to sample. Now let's change type of the image sampler to Progressive and render time to 0, which means it will be not limited in time. Next we will add a V-Ray Physical Cam. We'll change the viewport layout and press C to see the camera view. A small correction of camera position. Now we enable Save Frames and Automatic Vertical Tilt to align perspective along the Z-axis. Let's change the focal length to 25. After some final camera adjustments, the scene is ready to be lit. The first method that we will show you is how to lit the exterior with VraySun. We choose VraySun from the panel and add it to the scene. After placing the sun, we can see the dialog asking us if we want to add VraySky too. Of course we do, so press yes. Let's enable V-Ray Viewport Interactive Production Rendering. Set the position of the sun to get the most visually interesting lighting. Be careful not to get flat light from behind the camera and try to break large surfaces with shadows. One of the photographic principles that is often used is to place camera on the other side of the light and shoot into the dark side of our model. That means that shadowed surfaces should be closer to the camera. It works for the portrait photography, but also for real estate renders. This way we can see more interesting shadows. For a better effect, we will soften the shadows by increasing VraySun size multiplier. There are overexposed areas, so we need to decrease intensity of the sun. Now let's tweak the camera settings a bit. We will set the white balance and shutter speed. In this case, we also enable vignetting. The vignette is optional, you can always add it in post-production if you want. Now let's see how to add some clouds and exterior background to this scene. First, create a cylinder big enough to cover the whole scene. Adjust the height of the cylinder, aligning it with the tops of the trees. Remove the top and bottom polygons. Flip the polygons so that they face the camera. Press M to open Material Editor, drag and drop two bitmaps, diffuse and alpha attached to the project files. Create Vray material and connect the first image to diffuse slot and another one to opacity. Assign this material to cylinder. Add Unwrap UVW modifier. There is a visible seam. Rotate the cylinder to hide it behind the camera. Now let's fix the mapping. Open UV editor. Texture is stretched, we can fix it by scaling UV shell horizontally. We use 2D pen zoom for checking if the texture with trees is aligned and scaled correctly. We enable Vray IPR, as you can see, a black line is visible. We need to fix it by scaling UV shell vertically. Let's return to UV editor and make the necessary adjustments. Now it's okay. The last thing we need to change is to enter the object properties and untick Cast Shadows option. For demonstration purposes, we'll show you the differences regarding Cast Shadows option on and off. Now you can see that cylinder is blocking the sunlight. If Cast Shadows option is unticked, the sunlight is no longer blocked. Now we'll add Vray aerial perspective to the scene, simulating atmosphere. Press A to open Environment and Effects tab. In the Atmosphere tab, add Vray aerial perspective. The Vray aerial perspective creates the effect of viewing objects from a distance through the atmosphere, like haze or fog. The Vray aerial perspective needs VraySun for simulating this effect. Press F10 to enter Render Setup and go to the Render Elements tab. Add a render element, Vray Atmosphere. Open Vray Frame Buffer and start interactive rendering. Vray aerial perspective is affecting alpha channel of trees. Switching to Vray Atmosphere render element, we can see how Vray aerial perspective is affecting the scene. Because of Vray aerial perspective, there is a visible line of the cylinder. Once again, go to Object Properties, untick Apply Atmospheric option. Now we can see that the problem is gone. However, we need to compensate for the lack of Vray aerial perspective on the trees. Press M to open Material Editor. Add Color Correction map. Next, desaturate and brighten up diffuse texture. For demonstration purposes, we'll show you how we can affect appearance of very aerial perspective. Lower values of visibility range make the fog denser, while larger values reduce the effect. Atmosphere height specifies the height of the atmosphere layer. In scattered light intensity affects the strength of the atmospheric effect. Filter color controls color of the fog. If we enable Affect Background option, the atmospheric effect is also applied to the VraySky. When this option is disabled, fog does not affect the background, but it still has an impact on environment. Changing position of the sun affects the tint and direction of very aerial perspective. Even though the sun is off, it still affects the appearance of very aerial perspective. Now let's see how we can improve our render in the frame buffer. Press F10 to enter render setup and check your settings. In the previous tutorial, we explained the post-production process in the Vray frame buffer. Try to avoid overexposure areas and feel free to experiment with your own settings. There is overexposure in this area. Press M to open Material Editor. Add Vray bitmap. If you use older version of Vray, it's named Vray HDRI. Select Sunflowers AK HDR attached to project files. All HDRI maps used in our tutorials were downloaded from HDR@Haven.com. Change mapping time to spherical. Press A to open Environment and Effects. Replace VraySky with the new HDRI. Let's switch to Vray IPL. We need to adjust brightness of HDRI with our VraySun intensity. We'll tweak inverse gamma option. It is a gamma correction value. By slightly reducing it, you can gain more contrast. Horizontal rotation. This parameter controls the rotation of the environment map. Always try to adjust the position and rotation of the HDRI to the position of the sun in the scene. Add color correction map to change the color saturation of HDRI. Now we'll see how to make better reflections in windows. Duplicate V-Ray bitmap and color correction map. It is a good habit to name maps, it makes easier to control the scene. Increase the render multiplier of the duplicated map. Press F10 to enter Render Setup and go to the V-Ray tab. In Environment tab, tick Reflection Refraction Environment and assign Duplicated Color Correction Map to it. Reflection Refraction Environment option allows you to override the reflections or refractions. You can use the specified color or texture during the calculations. In our situation, we want to increase the reflections in windows using the HDRI bitmap. Note the increased reflection in windows. Open V-Ray Frame Buffer and start interactive rendering. We need to slightly fix the white balance, we will do it in camera settings. After changing environment and reflection inputs, overexposure areas appeared. Slightly reduce the intensity of the sun. For demonstration purposes, we'll show you how the scene would look like without VraySun but with VrayDome light as main source of the scene light. We will use the same HDRI bitmap. We don't need environment map in this case. We can also untick Reflection Refraction Environment. VrayDome light overrides this unless we turn it off in VrayDome settings. Of course, we also turn off the VraySun. We can see that shadows are sharper and we have less control over them. Now we can see how HDRI bitmap illuminated the scene when it was connected to the environment slot. The workflow presented in this tutorial gives you separate control over shadows, light direction, background and reflections. In the next tutorials, we will show you and explain in more detail working with VrayDome light. Thanks for watching.